Jews have always been David to the world's Goliath, tiny, vulnerable, and armed with little more than faith and a slingshot. And then we built a state, and the story got a lot more complicated. For a couple of decades, tiny Israel seemed like David facing off against armies of Goliaths. But today, the Jewish state has a formidable army and powerful allies, and we've traded our metaphorical slingshot for much heavier weapons. In other words, we finally have some power. For much of the world, that power and our tense relationship with our neighbors is enough to recast us as the villains. But zoom out, and we're still a teeny tiny minority in a tough neighborhood with a number of very angry enemies. So is Israel still the David, or have we become Goliath? These days, it's fashionable to side with the underdog. The triumph of the weak over the mighty just makes for a better story, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. But being a David isn't all triumph and glory. The OG David may have beat Goliath quickly without any injury to himself. The Jewish people haven't been as lucky. Sure, we've persevered despite the odds. We've even thrived. But you don't spend millennia being battered around by history without racking up a few scars. As Jews, the past is never far from our minds. Even before Israel existed, the Jews who would become Israelis were on guard against the worst-case scenario. After all, Israel is a nation of refugees. Half of the soldiers in the newly minted IDF were Holocaust survivors who had escaped the Nazi inferno only to be plunged headfirst into an existential struggle. Because one day after David and Goliath spoke Israel into being, 5 Arab armies invaded, and Israelis faced a stark choice: fight them off or be wiped off the map. To paraphrase Cersei Lannister, in the Middle East, you win or you die. The Jewish state won that first war, but we weren't out of the woods quite yet. Israel's neighbors operated on the motto, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
هنحارب من أجل استرداد أراضينا. وحينما أقول أراضينا لا نقصد أبدا هنا في مصر، ولكن نقصد كل الأراضي العربية المحتلة، القدس أولا، الضفة الغربية، الجولان، غزة، كل الأراضي العربية.
Israelis had every reason to take him seriously. Collective trauma doesn't disappear so quickly. It lingers like an unwelcome house guest, flashing nightmare reels before our eyes. But if there's a silver lining to our bloody past, it's this: vulnerability is an excellent motivator. There is no ferocity quite like the ferocity of the cornered and desperate.
When I first went to Israel back in '73, I met with Golda Meir. I said, "You've just spent the last hour telling me, in effect, you have no chance." She said, "One thing I didn't tell you. We Jews have a secret weapon. We have no place else to go."
Sounds like a pretty lousy secret weapon, but Israelis use it well, because it was that desperation and vulnerability that forced us to find creative answers to our most intractable threats. Like the Iron Dome system, which intercepts and neutralizes missiles and rockets, or the targeted and often unconventional elimination of our enemies, which establishes deterrence, or the nuclear weapons that remain the worst-kept secret in the Middle East. Yes, Israel has nuclear weapons, a back-pocket contingency plan for the moment that all hell breaks loose. And if history has taught us anything, it's that all hell will break loose eventually. We have a long memory for that kind of thing. So while it's true that we've come a long way from David and his slingshot, we're never going to see ourselves as Goliath, because we remember, viscerally, exactly what it felt like to confront an enemy much bigger and stronger than us. And we remember what it felt like to be crushed, again and again and again. And so the Jewish state has done everything it can to build up its military power, to ensure that never again isn't just an empty slogan, but a reminder, a collective responsibility for all of us to shoulder.
That act of David's of walking forward into, as the champion, into the encounter with Goliath is an astonishing, ridiculous act. It's an act of sacrifice and it's an act of willingness that you see in this generation of Israelis. Hezbollah built out traps in South Lebanon at a colossal strategic scale, and they had trained for a generation to do nothing but ensure that a lot of Israeli soldiers die if the Israeli soldiers ever attempt to take out Hezbollah. And there were very clever solutions to that, right? From the pager operation to Air Force strikes that hit exactly the right places and the right people. But the soldiers, the ground forces, the ordinary infantry were still just willing to go walk in to those villages, to those tunnels that had spent 30 years being built out, armed, and prepared specifically for that moment. And so I think that Israelis understand themselves as a David that will consistently win, because we face a type of enemy that keeps coming at us in ways that are self-destructive.
To the outside world, this sacrifice isn't noble, but a symptom of the way our power has corrupted us, particularly when it comes to our fraught relationship with Palestinians. After all, Palestinians don't have a regular army, just a handful of forces with no hope of success on a conventional battlefield. They don't have a competent government that can protect them. They don't even have bomb shelters. That's not to say that Palestinians can't threaten Israel. Every rocket, every stabbing, every abduction is a tangible and constant threat. But it's never going to be an even playing field. And so, from the outside, Israel, with its tanks and its smart bombs and even its nuclear weapons, starts to resemble Goliath, a big, bad bully, corrupted by power. Until you take a closer look, until you realize that the story of David and Goliath isn't quite as straightforward as it seems. It's not merely a tale of the small against the great, the weak against the mighty. This isn't Remember the Titans or even 300. The lessons go a lot deeper than that. Small and great, weak and mighty are a matter of perspective. From the outside, David looked small, and so his triumph seemed like a win for the little guy. But the Hebrew Bible isn't particularly interested in the distinction between the big guy or the little guy. David didn't see himself as weak. The shepherd boy from the tribe of Judah was used to fighting off lions and bears to protect his flock. His weapons were simple, but he had the training and experience necessary to use them well. More importantly, he had the power of his convictions. His heart burned with righteous fury, with faith in God. He didn't see himself as the underdog at all. He saw himself as a vessel, an instrument of a divine force no human can comprehend. And that's why he wins against Goliath. Not because he's smaller, not because he's great with a slingshot, but because he is right. At its root, this isn't really a story about the small against the mighty. It's a story of two competing moral systems, between the Jewish worldview and that of the Philistines. The Philistines were idolaters whose universe was ruled by multiple competing gods. But these gods were a whole lot like humans, more interested in playing power games than in justice or truth. And so the Philistines had no concept of absolute justice, just losers and winners, weakness and might. Only the strong survive in such a world, not because they are righteous, but because they are mighty. And then the Jewish people came along with their outlandish concept of ethical monotheism and turned this worldview on its head. Because to be a monotheist in a world of idolaters is to say that there is an absolute truth. Might doesn't make right, but the other way around. It's right that makes might. Righteous people will win the day, no matter their power, no matter their size. That's why David wins. That's why Goliath loses. Not because of their power or their size, but because of the righteousness of their respective causes. We no longer live in a world of Bronze Age idolaters, but moral relativism is alive and well. In some circles today, absolute truths are unfashionable. Everything is context dependent.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
It is a context-dependent decision.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
And that's why crowds of American college students cheered on the Houthis, or Hamas, or Hezbollah. Not because these groups are right about anything, but simply because in a fight against Israel, they have less power. After all, power corrupts. And since the Jewish state is more powerful than these non-state actors, well, Israel must be wrong, and these radical Islamists must be right. But in the story of David, the Hebrew Bible doesn't automatically conflate weakness with moral superiority. The underdog doesn't have moral authority simply because he is the underdog. David wins because he has God on his side, because he's fighting for a specific moral system. And that's why David remains a hero, albeit a flawed one, as he grows from being a simple shepherd to a king. From a boy with a slingshot to the commander who conquered Jerusalem. Most of the time, he wore his power easily, but even the mighty King David made mistakes, wielded his power incorrectly, hurting others in the process. And when he does, the Hebrew Bible calls him out on it, unflinchingly, in the exact same way that modern Israelis confront their country's power.
I am surprised by the fact that young Israelis, are still very much uncomfortable with power. I think we very much want to be moral. I think we very much feel uncomfortable with anyone who we turn into a victim. There's a lot of self-berating language going on, hesitation, concern about our policies, and at the same time understanding that we have to defend ourselves. And I think that surprised me because I expected that the younger generation in Israel would be more Goliath at this point.
Israelis don't want power. Israelis want us to feel safe. Israel's great purpose in the world is to be a safe place in which ordinary people can live happy lives. Israel doesn't seek power. Israel seeks safety. Israel seeks ordinariness. And when it has safety and ordinariness, it shrinks back down to size. And that contrasts with our enemies.
The state of Israel doesn't fight for funsies. It fights for survival. It fights for its people's safety. Our worst enemies are not ordinary Palestinians or Lebanese. Our enemies are the Islamist regimes and ideologies that have strangled the Middle East, convincing ordinary people that they will not be free until the Jewish state is destroyed. That ideology is toxic. It is also doomed.
I don't agree with every decision of the Israeli government, and I don't expect the military to always make the right decision in every battle. Obviously. But because it's a democracy, I know that at the fundamental level, my kids are taking part in a larger circle of protecting each other, as opposed to dying for the sake of somebody else's grand and weird ideological vision of whatever they are.
Israel, like all states, is flawed. It has significant power, and it sometimes misuses that power. We're not always the moral authority. That's an unhappy truth that we face every day. But we try our best to maintain our moral clarity, no matter how challenging the circumstances. We try to discipline our soldiers who abuse their power. Unlike our enemies, we don't target civilians. We make an effort to evacuate them from the areas where we operate. We even provide life-saving medical care to people like Yahya Sinwar. So I have to disagree, respectfully, with Golda Meir. Our secret superpower isn't our desperation, or our trauma, or our vulnerability. It's not the fact that we have nowhere else to go. That's all true, of course, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is this. The source of our power is our commitment to morality under the most difficult of circumstances. Our commitment to protecting our citizens. For centuries, the world told us our lives were cheap. For centuries, we had no country and no army to prove them wrong. But now we have an army of Davids, men and women fighting to defend our families and our home, the only one we have. And that is worth fighting for.